The glass shattered against the wall before I even finished my sentence. I did not throw it. My brother did. Dante stood over me, his jaw tight, his eyes burning with something between pity and contempt, and I sat there in my wheelchair, unable to do a single thing about it. 6 months ago, I was Victor Solani, a man who walked into rooms and watched grown men lower their eyes. 6 months ago, I did not need anyone to push my chair, lift my legs onto a footrest, or remind me to take my medicine. Now I needed all three, and my brother knew it. "You are not fit to run this family anymore," Dante said, his voice low so the guards outside my study could not hear. "Everyone sees it. Everyone whispers it. Why do you keep pretending?" I looked at him steadily. My legs had not moved since the crash, but my voice still worked, and so did my mind. "Pick up the glass," I told him. He laughed, short and bitter, then walked out without picking up anything. That was the kind of morning I had grown used to since the accident. My car had gone off the coastal road during a storm, flipped twice, and left me pinned under twisted metal for almost an hour before anyone found me. The doctors said I was fortunate to be alive. They did not say I was fortunate to be paralyzed from the waist down, because there was nothing fortunate about that. The Solani family did not stop moving just because I could not walk. Debts still needed collecting. Deals still needed protecting. Men still needed reminding why they feared us. And because I could no longer stand in front of them and remind them myself, Dante had slowly begun standing in my place. I did not trust him. I never had, not fully. Not since we were boys, and he used to take credit for things I built with my own hands. But blood is blood, and until proven otherwise, I had let him act as my voice, in meetings I could not attend. That morning, after he left my study, my housekeeper Margaret knocked softly on the door. "Mr. Solani," she said, "your new caregiver has arrived. The agency sent her early." I had almost forgotten. My previous caregiver, an older man named Harold, had quit 2 weeks earlier, saying the pressure of working for a man in my position was too much for his nerves. I did not blame him. Most people who worked closely with me eventually understood exactly how dangerous my world could be, and most of them wanted no part of it once they did. "Send her in," I said, straightening my shoulders the way I still did out of habit, even though half my body could not follow the command. The door opened, and a young woman walked in carrying a small leather bag and a clipboard. She had dark hair pulled back neatly, sharp brown eyes, and a way of moving that told me immediately she was not nervous, not intimidated, not impressed by the size of my house or the guards standing at every corner of it. "Mr. Solani," she said, extending her hand as if I were any other patient in any other home. "My name is Elena Marsh. I will be your physical therapist and caregiver, starting today." I looked at her hand for a moment before shaking it. Most people who entered this house either trembled slightly or tried too hard to appear calm. Elena did neither. She simply waited, patient, professional, unbothered. "You know who I am," I said. It was not a question. "I know your file says spinal injury, incomplete paralysis, partial nerve function in both legs," she said. "That is what matters to me right now." I almost smiled. Almost. "My reputation does not concern you?" "Your reputation is not on my clipboard," she said, opening it and clicking her pen. "Your recovery is." For the first time in 6 months, I felt something other than frustration sitting in my chest. I could not name it yet, but it was there, small and unfamiliar, like a light switched on in a room I had forgotten existed. Elena began her examination immediately, testing the movement in my toes, pressing gently along my calves, asking me to describe what I felt when she touched certain points on my skin. Her questions were direct, her hands were steady. She did not flinch when I told her, flatly, that most of the men who worked in this house had killed before, and that she should not expect a peaceful job. "I did not take this job for peace," she said, without looking up from her notes. "I took it because your last therapist wrote that you have partial nerve response in your left leg. That means there is a chance, Mr. Solani, a real chance you could walk again with the right work, if you are willing to do it." I studied her carefully. In my line of work, everyone wanted something. Money, protection, favors, information. I had learned long ago to search for the angle behind every kind word. But when I looked at Elena Marsh, I could not find one. She seemed to want exactly what she said she wanted, nothing more, and that unsettled me more than any threat Dante had made that morning. "Then let us begin," I said. The first session was harder than I expected. She had me lie back and lift my legs using a system of straps and resistance bands, and even the smallest movement sent sharp, unfamiliar pain through muscles that had gone silent for months. I gritted my teeth and said nothing, refusing to show weakness in front of a stranger, but Elena noticed anyway. "You do not have to hide pain from me," she said quietly. "Hiding it only makes the work harder. I need to know exactly what hurts and where, or I cannot help your body heal correctly." "I am not used to being honest about pain," I admitted, surprising myself with the confession. "I understand," she said, "but in this room, it is the only way forward." Halfway through the session, she paused and studied the readings on a small monitor strapped to my ankle. "Your left leg is responding faster than your file suggested," she said, almost to herself. "That is a good sign, a very good sign." "Do not get my hopes up for nothing," I said, more sharply than I intended. "I am not in the business of false hope, Mr. Solani," she said, meeting my eyes without hesitation. "I only tell you what the numbers show. The numbers show progress. What you do with that information is your choice." Her honesty struck me harder than any flattery could have. Every person who had come near me since the crash, doctors, staff, even members of my own family, had either exaggerated my chances to keep me calm or avoided the subject entirely to keep me from getting angry. Elena did neither. She simply told the truth and let me decide how to feel about it. We continued the exercises for another half hour. She adjusted the resistance bands twice, watched my breathing carefully, and stopped me once, when she noticed I was pushing through pain that should have been reported instead of hidden. Each time she corrected me, her tone stayed calm, professional, never condescending, and slowly, I found myself following her instructions without the resistance I usually gave to anyone who tried to tell me what to do. By the end of the session, sweat had soaked through my shirt, and my arms were shaking from holding my own weight during the transfers. Elena helped me back into my chair with practiced efficiency, adjusting the footrests, checking my posture, all without a hint of pity in her expression. She treated me like a man capable of healing, not a broken thing to be managed. As she packed her bag to leave for the day, Dante appeared in the doorway again, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed, watching her with an expression I did not like. "So this is the new one," he said, his eyes moving over her slowly, deliberately, in a way that made my jaw tighten. "The agency finally sent someone worth looking at." Elena did not react. She simply continued packing her bag, her spine straight, her face calm. "That is enough, Dante," I said sharply. He raised his hands in mock surrender, smirking. "I am only being friendly, brother. She should feel welcome here." "She is here to work," I said, "not to be looked at." Something flickered across his face, something between annoyance and challenge, but he said nothing more. He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the marble hallway, and I felt my hands tighten on the arms of my chair. Elena finally looked at me once he was gone. "Thank you," she said simply. "You do not need to thank me for basic respect," I said, though the words came out rougher than I intended. "In this house," she said carefully, "I am not sure basic respect is something everyone practices." I did not answer, because she was right, and we both knew it. That night, after Elena left and the house grew quiet, I sat by my window, looking out over the dark grounds, the guards patrolling the perimeter, with their flashlights cutting thin lines through the shadows. I thought about the crash, about the year of silence and frustration that followed, about the brother who circled my weakness like it was an opportunity rather than a tragedy, and for reasons I could not fully explain. I thought about a young woman, with steady hands and a clipboard, who looked at me and saw a man who might walk again, instead of a man already defeated. I did not know yet how much that single difference would change everything. Margaret came in to check on me before bed, as she did every night, adjusting my blankets and setting my medication on the nightstand. "She seems capable," Margaret said carefully, clearly choosing her words. "The new one, Elena." "She does," I agreed. "Dante was watching her closely today," Margaret added, hesitating. I do not think his intentions were entirely professional. I looked at the ceiling for a long moment. I noticed. Should I be concerned, sir? I thought about the flicker of challenge in Dante's eyes, the way he had looked Elena up and down, as though she were an object rather than a person, the small, sharp discomfort that had risen in my chest at the sight of it. I thought about how quickly I had spoken up, faster, and more forcefully than I usually bothered to for household staff. Keep an eye on things, I told Margaret. That is all for now. She nodded and left, closing the door softly behind her, and I lay awake for a long time afterward, staring into the darkness, aware of a strange and uncomfortable truth settling into my chest. My body might have been broken by that crash on the coastal road, but something else inside me, something I thought had gone silent along with my legs, had just been switched back on, and I did not yet know if that was a blessing or the beginning of a very serious problem. The plate shattered against the kitchen floor before I could stop my own hand from knocking it off the table. I had been trying to feed myself with my weaker hand, an exercise Elena insisted would rebuild coordination faster than any machine could. Frustration got the better of me, and the plate paid the price. Margaret rushed in from the hallway, but Elena raised a hand to stop her. "Leave it," Elena said calmly. "He needs to pick it up himself." I stared at her. "Excuse me?" "You heard me, Mr. Solani," she said, arms crossed, standing exactly where she had a week earlier when we first met. "You dropped it. You can bend and reach. Prove to yourself that you still can." I wanted to argue. In another life, I would have ordered someone removed from my house for speaking to me that way. But something about Elena made ordering her away impossible, and so, gritting my teeth, I leaned down, gripped the edge of the table, and reached for the broken pieces on the floor. It took effort. My fingers trembled. My shoulder ached from the strain. But I did it, and when I straightened back up, holding the shattered pieces in my palm, I saw something in Elena's expression that looked almost like pride. "Good," she said simply, and went back to preparing the next set of exercises. That was the rhythm we had built over the past week. She pushed. I resisted. Eventually I obeyed, and slowly, painfully, my body began remembering things it had forgotten. My fingers gripped tighter. My arms held weight longer. Once, during a transfer from bed to chair, I felt a flicker of sensation in my right knee that had not been there since the crash. Elena noted it immediately in her folder, her excitement carefully controlled but unmistakable. "This is real progress, Victor," she said that day, using my first name for the first time. She caught herself immediately. "Mr. Solani, I apologize." "Victor is fine," I said, surprising myself again. She smiled, small and brief, but genuine. "Victor, then." It should not have mattered. A caregiver using my first name instead of my title. In my world, titles mattered more than most things. Men who forgot to use mine sometimes forgot to breathe soon after. But from Elena, the familiarity felt earned rather than disrespectful, and I found I did not mind it at all. Unfortunately, not everyone in the house shared my growing respect for her. Dante had begun finding reasons to be present whenever Elena worked with me. He would linger in doorways, comment on her appearance to the other men within earshot, or interrupt sessions with questions that had nothing to do with family business. At first, I dismissed it as his usual arrogance. By the second week, I realized it had become something closer to obsession. "She has a nice shape for someone who spends all day pushing wheelchairs around," Dante said one afternoon, loud enough for Elena to hear from the next room, where she was preparing equipment. "Dante," I warned. "What? I am simply making an observation, brother." He grinned, leaning against the doorframe with the same casual arrogance he used whenever he thought he could get away with something. "You should be thanking me for noticing what is right in front of you, unless, of course, you have already noticed yourself." My jaw tightened. "Watch your mouth." "Careful, Victor," he said, lowering his voice so only I could hear. "People are already saying you have gone soft since the accident. Do not give them more reasons to talk." He left before I could respond, his laughter echoing down the hallway, and I sat there gripping the arms of my chair so tightly my knuckles turned pale. Elena appeared in the doorway a moment later, her expression carefully neutral, though I could tell she had heard every word. "I apologize for my brother," I said stiffly. "You do not need to apologize for another man's behavior. she said, setting her equipment bag on the table. "But I appreciate that you tried to stop him. It should not have needed stopping in the first place." She studied me for a moment, something thoughtful crossing her face. "Most men in your position would not have said anything at all. They would have let it happen and called it harmless." "I am not most men," I said. "No," she said quietly, almost to herself. "You are not." We returned to the exercises after that, but something had shifted between us, subtle and unspoken. She worked with the same professionalism as always, correcting my posture, tracking my progress, pushing me through pain I would have hidden from anyone else. But there was a new ease to our conversation, small jokes exchanged during rest periods, brief moments of genuine laughter that I had almost forgotten I was capable of. One evening, after a particularly grueling session, she stayed later than usual, helping me organize the medical reports my previous doctors had left behind. We sat together at the long table in my study, papers spread between us, and for the first time since the crash, I felt something close to peace. "Can I ask you something personal?" I said, surprising myself with the question. She looked up from the folder in her hands. "You can ask. I may not answer. Why did you take this job? A man like me is not exactly a safe patient to have on your record." She considered the question carefully before answering. "My mother spent the last 2 years of her life in a wheelchair after a stroke. Most of her caregivers treated her like she was already gone, like her mind had stopped working the same day her legs did. I promised myself that if I ever worked in this field, I would never treat a patient that way, no matter who they were." Something in her voice carried old grief, carefully controlled, the kind of pain that never fully leaves a person. I recognized it because I carried my own version of it. "I am sorry," I said quietly. "It was a long time ago," she said, though her eyes told a different story. "But it is why I do what I do. Everyone deserves to be seen as capable of something, even when the world has already decided they are not." I studied her for a long moment. In my world, vulnerability was a weakness men exploited without hesitation. But sitting there with Elena, sharing quiet honesty in a room usually reserved for threats and negotiations, I did not feel exposed. I felt understood. Later that night, after she left, Dante found me alone in the study. "You are spending a great deal of time with the help," he said, his tone deceptively casual as he poured himself a drink from my private collection without asking. "She is my caregiver," I said. "Spending time together is the job." "Is it?" He turned to face me, swirling the glass in his hand. "Because from where I am standing, it looks like something else. And people are starting to notice, Victor. A boss who cannot control his own family is a boss who will not keep his throne for long." "Are you threatening me?" "I am advising you," he said smoothly, "as your brother, before someone else decides to take advantage of your condition." The word landed exactly where he intended it to land, sharp and deliberate. I said nothing, watching him finish his drink, and set the glass down without cleaning up after himself, exactly as he always did, as though the world existed to clean up his mess while he moved on to the next one. "Get out of my study," I said quietly. He smiled, the same smile he had worn since childhood, whenever he knew he had gotten under my skin. "Of course, brother. Rest well." He left, and I sat alone in the dim light of my study, thinking about his words, about the careful way he had chosen to weaponize both my condition and my growing connection to Elena. I did not yet know what he intended to do with that knowledge, but I knew, with the certainty that came from years in this business, that Dante rarely made comments without a plan attached to them. The following morning, Elena arrived earlier than scheduled, her expression tighter than usual. "Is everything all right?" I asked as she set up the equipment for our session. "Your brother stopped me in the hallway before I reached your study," she said carefully, choosing her words. "He asked questions about my personal life, where I live, whether I have family nearby, whether anyone would notice if my schedule changed." A cold, familiar anger settled into my chest, the kind I had not felt with this intensity since before the crash. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing," she said firmly. "I told him it was none of his concern, and I walked away." "Good," I said. "If he approaches you again, come to me immediately." She studied me carefully. "You are genuinely worried." My brother does not ask idle questions, I said. Everything he does serves a purpose, even when that purpose is not immediately clear. Elena nodded slowly, absorbing the warning, then squared her shoulders and returned to preparing my exercises with the same steady professionalism she always carried. But I noticed, throughout that session, how often her eyes moved toward the doorway, how her hands tightened slightly whenever footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. We worked through the exercises in near silence that day, both of us aware of the shifting danger surrounding us, both of us unwilling to speak it aloud. By the end of the session, I could feel new strength gathering in muscles that had been silent for months, small victories that should have filled me with hope. Instead, all I could think about was the look on Dante's face the previous night, and the certainty settling cold in my stomach that whatever plan he was building, Elena had somehow become a part of it. That evening, I called for Salvatore, the one man in my organization I trusted without reservation. He had served my father before me, and he had carried me out of the wreckage on the coastal road with his own hands, refusing to leave until every paramedic on the scene confirmed I would survive the night. "You wanted to see me," Salvatore said, settling into the chair across from my desk, his weathered face unreadable as always. "Keep a closer watch on Dante," I said. "Not obvious. Quiet. I want to know who he meets, where he goes, and what he says when he thinks no one important is listening." Salvatore's eyes narrowed slightly. "You suspect him of something specific, or is this simple caution?" "He has been asking questions about my caregiver," I said. "Where she lives, whether she has family who would notice if her routine changed. Those are not the questions of a man who is simply being difficult." Salvatore was quiet for a long moment, weighing the information the way he weighed everything, carefully and without haste. "Your brother has always resented standing in your shadow, Victor, since you were boys. I remember your father saying it would become a problem someday." "My father said many things," I said. "Most of them were right." "I will watch him," Salvatore promised, quietly, as you asked. "But if he is planning something against the family, or against a person under your protection, you may need to act before it becomes a larger problem than a few unwelcome questions." I nodded, understanding the weight behind his words. In our world, problems left unattended rarely stayed small. They grew, the way untreated wounds grew, until the only remaining options for treatment became far more severe than anyone would have chosen at the beginning. "There is something else," Salvatore added, hesitating slightly, which was unusual for a man who rarely hesitated about anything. "The men have noticed a change in you these past 2 weeks, since the new caregiver arrived." "What kind of change?" "You are sharper," he said, "more present. For months after the accident, you attended meetings but seemed distant, as though part of you had stopped fighting. That part has returned. The men have noticed, and most of them are relieved to see it." I considered his words carefully, surprised by how accurately they matched what I had felt within myself. Elena had not simply worked on my legs and arms. Somehow, without either of us fully acknowledging it, she had worked on something deeper, something that had gone quiet the same night my car left the coastal road. "Watch Dante," I repeated. "And Salvatore, if anything happens to Elena, anything at all, I want to know about it before it finishes happening, not after." "Understood," he said, rising from his chair. "I will report back within a few days." After he left, I sat alone with my thoughts for a long while, the study dim around me, the house quiet except for the distant sound of guards changing shifts along the perimeter. I thought about how strange it was that the woman meant only to help me walk again had somehow become the person I most wanted to protect, more urgently than I protected my own throne, my own name, my own carefully built empire. It should have worried me more than it did. In my world, caring too deeply about anyone was a vulnerability rivals learned to exploit. But sitting there, weighing Salvatore's warning against the memory of Elena's calm honesty, I found I could not bring myself to regret the shift happening inside me. Whatever Dante was planning, I intended to stop it before it reached her. The sound of my own hand striking my brother's face echoed through the dining hall before I even understood what I had done. It happened at the monthly family dinner, an old tradition my father had insisted on decades ago, meant to remind every branch of the Solani family that blood still mattered more than ambition. 12 of us sat around the long table that night, cousins, capos, my Aunt Margaret from my father's side, and Elena, seated near the end at my request, since she had been working late and I had insisted she eat before heading home. The evening began normally enough. Wine was poured. Old stories were shared. My cousin Marco made everyone laugh with an exaggerated account of a deal gone wrong years earlier. For a moment, sitting there among my family, I almost forgot the tension that had been building for weeks. Then Dante decided to remind me of it. "So Elena," he said, his voice carrying easily across the table, drawing every eye toward her. "Tell us, how does a woman find herself working so closely with my brother, bathing him, dressing him, tending to every private need? It must take a certain kind of woman to accept such intimate work." The table went quiet. I felt my jaw tighten, the wine glass in my hand suddenly heavy. "Dante," I warned, my voice low. He ignored me entirely, leaning forward with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "I am simply curious what draws a woman to that line of work. Some would call it devotion, others might call it something else entirely. Perhaps she enjoys having so much control over a man who once controlled everything around him." A few cousins shifted uncomfortably. Marco stopped laughing. Elena sat perfectly still, her spine straight, her hands folded in her lap, but I could see the tightness in her jaw, the careful control she was exercising to keep her expression neutral in front of my entire family. "That is enough," I said, my voice sharper now. "Is it?" Dante pressed, emboldened by the wine and whatever grievance had been building in him for weeks. "Or should we simply say what everyone at this table already suspects, that the great Victor Solani has fallen for the woman paid to wipe him and wheel him from room to room? Tell me, brother, does she change more than your bandages?" The words landed like a physical blow, crude and deliberate, meant to humiliate both Elena and me in front of everyone who mattered in our world. I saw my Aunt Margaret's hand fly to her mouth. I saw Salvatore's face darken with fury from his seat near the door. And I saw Elena's composure finally crack, just slightly, just enough for me to notice the hurt flickering behind her carefully controlled expression. Something inside me broke free in that moment, some restraint I had been holding on to since the accident, some quiet acceptance that my body's limitations meant I had to accept whatever indignities came my way. I gripped the edge of the table with both hands, my knuckles white, and I pushed myself upward, my legs trembling beneath me, screaming in protest at the sudden weight they had not carried unsupported in 6 months. Pain shot through my hips and lower back, sharp and blinding, but I refused to let it show on my face. I refused to let anything show except the cold fury building in my chest. The room fell into stunned silence as I rose, unsteady but upright, gripping the table for balance. No one had seen me stand since the crash. No one believed I still could. I raised my hand and struck Dante across the face before he could react, the sound of the impact ringing through the dining hall like a gunshot. He staggered back in his chair, more from shock than from the force of the blow, his hand flying to his cheek, his eyes wide with disbelief. The entire table stared, frozen, no one daring to move or speak. "You will not speak to her that way again," I said, my voice low and shaking with restrained fury, my legs trembling beneath me as I forced myself to remain standing. "Not in my house, not at my table, not ever." Dante stared up at me, stunned into silence for the first time in weeks, his cheek already reddening from the strike. For a long moment, no one in the room breathed. Then, slowly, painfully, my legs gave out beneath me, and Salvatore was there instantly, catching me before I hit the floor, easing me back into my chair with careful hands. The pain in my hips flared white-hot, but I barely registered it, my eyes still fixed on my brother's stunned expression. "You will apologize to her," I said, my breathing ragged, but my voice steady. "Now." Dante's eyes flicked toward Elena, then back to me, something shifting behind his shock, something that looked almost like fear. In our world, respect was currency, and I had just spent a great deal of it to prove a point in front of everyone who mattered. He began, his voice uncertain for the first time I could remember. "I apologize, Elena. My comments were inappropriate." Elena said nothing for a long moment, studying him with an expression I could not fully read. Then she nodded once, curt and controlled. "Thank you." The dinner ended shortly after that, guests excusing themselves quietly, murmuring apologies for the disruption, casting careful glances between Dante, myself, and Elena as they filed out of the dining hall. Within 20 minutes, the room had emptied except for Salvatore, Margaret, Elena, and myself. "Victor," Margaret said quietly, kneeling beside my chair, checking my legs with worried hands. "You should not have pushed yourself like that. The strain on your body could have caused serious damage." "I am aware," I said, wincing slightly, as she adjusted my position. "It was necessary." "Was it?" she asked gently. I looked past her toward Elena, who stood near the window, her arms wrapped around herself, staring out at the dark grounds beyond the glass. She had not spoken since thanking Dante for his forced apology, and something about her silence worried me more than any argument could have. "Give us a moment," I told Margaret and Salvatore. They exchanged a glance, then nodded, leaving the room quietly, closing the heavy doors behind them. "Elena," I said carefully. She turned to face me, and I saw that her eyes were bright, though she was fighting hard not to let tears fall. "You should not have done that," she said, her voice tight. "Your legs, Victor. The therapist in me is furious with you for the strain you just put your body through. And the rest of you?" I asked quietly. She was silent for a long moment, studying me carefully. "The rest of me does not know what to feel," she admitted. "No one has ever stood up for me like that. Not in any job I have held, not even in my own family, most days." "You did not deserve what he said," I told her. "Not for a single second." "No," she agreed softly. "I did not. But Victor, you nearly injured yourself proving that point. What if the strain had caused permanent damage? What if you had torn something in your spine trying to make a statement at dinner? Then it would have been worth it," I said simply. She stared at me, something shifting behind her expression, surprise mixing with an emotion I could not quite name. "You cannot mean that." "I do," I said. "For 6 months, I have accepted every small humiliation this condition has forced onto me, because fighting against them seemed pointless. But watching him speak to you that way, watching everyone at that table stay silent while he humiliated you, I could not accept it. Not that, not you." The room fell quiet between us, the weight of the evening settling into the space around our words. Elena crossed the distance between us slowly, kneeling beside my chair the way Margaret had, but her hands, when they touched mine, carried none of the clinical distance her work usually required. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for standing up, literally and otherwise." "You do not need to thank me," I said, echoing words she had spoken to me weeks earlier. "Basic decency should never require gratitude." She smiled then, small and genuine, the first real smile I had seen from her since the dinner began falling apart. "You remembered that?" "I remember everything you say to me," I admitted, surprising myself with the honesty. We sat together in comfortable silence for a while after that, the tension of the evening slowly draining from the room, replaced by something quieter, something neither of us dared to name directly. Eventually, Salvatore knocked softly and entered, informing me that Dante had left the estate entirely, taking his car and driving into the city without informing anyone of his destination. "Let him go," I said. "He needs time to process what happened tonight." "Victor," Salvatore said carefully, "a man like Dante does not simply process humiliation quietly. You struck him in front of the entire family. He will not forget that easily, and he will not forgive it either." I considered his warning carefully, the earlier fear settling back into my chest, the knowledge that tonight's confrontation had solved one problem while likely creating a far more dangerous one. "Watch him closely," I told Salvatore, "closer than before. Whatever plan he was already building, tonight will have accelerated it." Salvatore nodded grimly and left to organize additional surveillance, leaving Elena and me alone once more in the quiet study, the estate settling into an uneasy silence around us. Later that night, unable to sleep despite the exhaustion pulling at every muscle in my body, I wheeled myself to the window of my bedroom and looked out over the dark grounds. Guards moved along their usual patrol routes, flashlights cutting thin lines through the shadows, and somewhere beyond the gates, My brother was likely sitting in some dimly lit bar, nursing his wounded pride and plotting his next move. I thought about our childhood, about the years before either of us understood what our family truly was, back when Dante followed me everywhere, eager to learn, eager to be included. Something had shifted between us as we grew older, some slow poison of jealousy that had taken root and grown quietly for years, until tonight, it had finally burst into the open in the worst possible way. Margaret found me there an hour later, unable to sleep herself, carrying a cup of tea she set on the table beside my chair without a word. "You are worried about him," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "I am worried about what he might do," I corrected. "There is a difference." "Is there?" she asked gently. "You have always worried about your brother, Victor, even when he gave you every reason not to. Since you were boys." I said nothing, staring out at the darkness, unable to argue with her observation. "Whatever happens next," Margaret continued, "you did the right thing tonight. No man, brother or otherwise, should speak to a woman the way he spoke to Elena. Your father would have done the same, had anyone dared say such things in his presence. My father would have done far worse than slap him," I said quietly. "Perhaps," she agreed, "but you are not your father, Victor. You never have been, even before the accident, and that difference has always been your greatest strength, whether you choose to believe it or not." She left shortly after, taking her untouched tea with her, and I sat alone again in the darkness, turning her words over in my mind. I had spent years believing that softness, mercy, restraint were weaknesses my father would have never tolerated in a successor. But sitting there, exhausted and aching, having just defended someone I cared for at genuine physical cost to myself, I began to wonder if perhaps those qualities were not weaknesses at all. Meanwhile, across the city, in a bar tucked into a quiet side street, my brother sat with a man I did not yet know, a man whose name would come to mean a great deal of trouble for my family in the days ahead. Dante nursed a glass of dark liquor, the mark of my hand still faintly visible on his cheek, his pride still bleeding from the humiliation of being struck down in front of everyone who mattered. "Rough night?" the man across from him asked, his voice smooth, almost amused. "You could say that," Dante muttered, finishing his drink in one long swallow. "Your brother still thinks he runs things," the man observed, refilling Dante's glass without being asked. "Even from a wheelchair, even after everything, does not seem right, does it? A man who cannot stand on his own, holding on to a throne that could belong to someone stronger." Dante said nothing for a long moment, staring into his glass, the humiliation of the evening still burning fresh in his chest. "What would it take," he finally asked quietly, "for things to change?" The man across from him smiled slowly, the expression of someone who had been waiting patiently for exactly this question. "Less than you might think, Dante. Far less than you might think. We simply need the right information, delivered at the right moment, to the right people. Your brother's empire has enemies who would love an opportunity to move against him while he is weakened. All they need is a door left open. And if I open that door? Then perhaps," the man said, leaning back with quiet satisfaction, "the Solani family finally has a leader capable of standing on his own 2 feet, in every sense of the phrase." Dante did not answer immediately, staring into his glass, weighing the weight of the betrayal being offered to him, weighing the memory of his brother's hand striking his face in front of the entire family, weighing years of resentment that had finally found an outlet willing to help him act on it. Back at the estate, unaware of the conversation unfolding across the city, I finally allowed myself to sleep, exhaustion pulling me under, despite the worry still churning in my chest. I looked at her carefully, weighing the events of the evening, weighing the danger I had likely invited by defending her so publicly. "I do not regret what I did," I said quietly, "whatever comes next." Elena studied me for a long moment, her expression unreadable, before she finally spoke. "Neither do I," she said softly. "Whatever comes next, Victor, we will face it together." "I do not regret what I did," I said quietly, once she had settled again beside my chair. "Whatever comes next." "Neither do I," she repeated softly. "Whatever comes next, Victor, we will face it together." "You do not have to stay tied to this," I told her honestly. "My world is dangerous, Elena. Tonight proved that clearly enough. You could walk away, Take another position, somewhere far quieter than this house has ever been. She considered the offer for a long moment, her eyes searching mine in the dim light of the study. Is that what you want, for me to walk away? No, I admitted, the honesty costing me something I could not quite name. It is the opposite of what I want. But I would rather you leave safely than stay and be harmed because of decisions that are not yours to carry. Victor, she said gently, I have spent my whole career caring for people the world decided to give up on. I did not walk away from my mother when her illness made caring for her difficult, and I am not walking away from you now, not because of a man who cannot control his own jealousy. Something eased in my chest at her words, some tension I had been carrying since the moment Dante first opened his mouth at dinner. I did not know, in that moment, how quickly those words would be tested, or how far Dante was willing to go to reclaim the power and pride he believed I had stripped from him at that dinner table. But sitting there with Elena beside me, feeling stronger and more determined than I had in 6 long months, I found myself ready to face whatever storm was coming. The phone in Salvatore's hand buzzed twice before he answered it, and the moment his face changed, I knew the news would not be good. 3 days had passed since the dinner, 3 days of tense quiet across the estate, 3 days of Dante remaining conspicuously absent from every family gathering. I had continued my therapy sessions with Elena as though nothing unusual had happened, though both of us moved through the house with a heightened awareness, checking hallways, noting unfamiliar cars near the gate, waiting for whatever storm Dante was building to finally break. Sir, Salvatore said, lowering the phone slowly, his expression grim, you need to hear this directly. He placed the phone on speaker, and a voice I recognized, one of the men assigned to watch my brother, began speaking quickly, nervously, the words tumbling out in a rush. Dante has been meeting with Nathan Cross, the man reported. 3 times this week. The last meeting, they were joined by 2 men I did not recognize, but Cross's people confirmed they work for the Hargrove family. The name landed in my chest like a physical blow. The Hargrove family had been rivals to the Solani name for over a decade, a cold war of territory and influence that occasionally erupted into open conflict before an uneasy truce settled things once more. If Dante was meeting with them now, willingly, repeatedly, the implications were serious enough to threaten everything my father had built. What are they discussing? I asked, my voice tight. We could not get close enough to hear everything, the man admitted, but Cross mentioned something about weakness at the top, about opportunities that would not stay open forever. Dante did not disagree with him. I closed my eyes for a moment, absorbing the weight of the betrayal settling into my chest. My own brother, selling information, selling access, selling whatever advantage the Hargrove family needed to move against the very family that had raised him, fed him, protected him, his entire life. Thank you, I said finally. Keep watching. I want to know the moment anything changes. The call ended, and I sat in silence for a long moment, memories surfacing unbidden of the 2 of us as children, sharing a bedroom in this same estate before either of us understood what our family truly required of its sons. Dante had once cried in that room after our father struck him for losing a simple errand meant to teach him responsibility, and I remembered holding my younger brother while he sobbed, promising him that someday, when I ran things, it would be different, kinder, fairer. I had tried to keep that promise in the years since inheriting my father's position, giving Dante responsibilities, territory, respect he had not always earned through his own effort. Perhaps that generosity had been part of the problem, teaching him to expect power, without teaching him to value the discipline required to hold it responsibly. Salvatore looked at me carefully, waiting for my reaction. Victor, he said quietly, we need to consider that your brother may be planning something more immediate than simple information sharing. The Hargrove family does not usually settle for words alone. There is history there worth remembering, Salvatore added. Your father fought the Hargrove family for territory along the harbor for nearly a decade, before the truce finally held. Old wounds like that do not heal completely. They wait, patient, for exactly the kind of opening your brother appears willing to hand them. Then we make certain that opening closes before they can use it, I said firmly. I am aware, I continued, my mind already racing through possibilities, weighing threats, calculating responses, the way my father had taught me since childhood. Elena arrived for our afternoon session shortly after Salvatore left to organize additional security measures, and she must have seen something troubled in my expression because she paused before beginning the usual routine. "What has happened?" she asked directly. I considered keeping the details from her, protecting her from the full weight of the danger surrounding us, but something in her steady gaze told me she deserved honesty rather than careful management. "My brother has been meeting with a rival family," I told her, "discussing weaknesses, discussing opportunities. I do not yet know exactly what he is planning, but it involves undermining my position, possibly with violence." Elena absorbed the information calmly, though I noticed her hands tighten slightly around the folder she carried. "And where does that leave me?" she asked. "He already showed interest in my personal information. If he is working with people willing to act against your family directly, that interest becomes considerably more dangerous." "I know," I said quietly, "which is why I need you to consider leaving the estate until this situation resolves itself. Salvatore can arrange a secure location, somewhere far removed from any of this." "No," she said firmly, setting the folder down with more force than necessary. "Elena." "No, Victor," she repeated. "I told you 3 nights ago that I was not walking away because of your brother's jealousy, and I meant it. Running now, hiding while you face whatever comes next alone, that is not who I am." "This is not about who you are," I said, frustration creeping into my voice. "This is about keeping you alive. My brother already asked questions designed to locate you outside protected settings. If the Hargrove family decides you are valuable leverage against me, they will not hesitate to use you." She was quiet for a moment, absorbing the seriousness of the threat, before finally nodding slowly. "Then let me stay here, inside the estate, where your security is strongest. Do not send me somewhere unfamiliar and unprotected, simply to ease your own worry. I would rather face danger beside people I trust than face it alone somewhere unknown." I studied her carefully, recognizing the same stubborn resolve I had seen in her since our very first meeting, the same refusal to be managed or dismissed, simply because managing her would feel safer for everyone else involved. "All right," I said finally, "you stay here, but you follow every security protocol Salvatore establishes, without exception." "Agreed," she said, and something in her expression softened slightly, grateful that I had not simply overridden her wishes, despite my authority to do so. "Can I tell you something?" she added quietly. "That has nothing to do with any of this danger?" "Of course," I said. "These past weeks, working with you, watching you fight through pain most people would have given up on entirely, I have found myself caring about your recovery in a way that goes beyond my job description." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "I have found myself caring about you, Victor. Not the reputation, not the empire. You." The confession settled into the room quietly, and I found myself searching for words equal to the honesty she had just offered me. "I have felt the same," I admitted. "Since the first day you walked into my study with that clipboard, refusing to be impressed or frightened by anything about this house. I told myself it was gratitude, professional respect, nothing more. I no longer believe that was ever the whole truth." She smiled softly, though worry still lingered behind her eyes, given everything unfolding around us. "Then let us survive tonight," she said, "and have this conversation properly, once your family is no longer trying to destroy itself from within." "Agreed," I said, echoing her earlier word, and something passed between us in that moment, unspoken but clearly understood by both of us. A promise to return to this conversation once the immediate danger had passed. We continued the session that afternoon, though both of us moved through the exercises with distracted focus, our minds occupied by the growing danger surrounding the estate. Midway through, my phone buzzed with an urgent message from Salvatore, requesting my immediate presence in the security office. Elena helped me into my chair, and we made our way together through the halls, passing additional guards who had clearly been stationed at new positions since the earlier call. The tension in the house had visibly increased, staff moving quickly and quietly, doors that were usually left open now closed and monitored. Margaret passed us in the hallway, carrying a stack of folded linens, and paused when she saw our expressions. "Something has happened," she said, not a question. We will explain soon, I told her. For now, make sure every entrance is double-checked, and keep the staff away from the East Wing until Salvatore says otherwise. She nodded without argument, years of service having taught her to trust my instructions even without immediate explanation, and hurried off to relay the message to the rest of the household staff. Salvatore waited in the security office, surrounded by monitors displaying feeds from cameras positioned around the property. His expression, when he turned to greet us, carried a gravity I had rarely seen from him. "We intercepted a message," he said without preamble. "Dante has arranged a meeting for tonight, at the old warehouse near the harbor. Cross will be there, along with representatives from the Hargrove family. Based on what we could gather, they intend to finalize an arrangement that would grant the Hargrove family access to our shipping routes, in exchange for their support in removing you from leadership." The words settled heavily in the room, confirming every fear I had carried since learning of Dante's meetings. My own brother, willing to hand over decades of family territory and influence, simply to satisfy his wounded pride and his belief that he deserved the throne I currently occupied. "Removing me how exactly?" I asked, my voice carefully controlled despite the anger building beneath the surface. Salvatore hesitated slightly before answering. "The message did not specify details, sir, but given the nature of these arrangements, and given the resources the Hargrove family typically employs, I do not believe they intend a peaceful transition of power." I absorbed this information silently, my mind already working through the possibilities, the necessary responses, the decisions that would determine not just my own survival, but the safety of everyone under my protection, including the woman standing quietly beside my chair, her hand resting protectively on my shoulder. "We move first," I said finally, "tonight, before they have the chance to finalize whatever they are planning." "Victor," Salvatore said carefully, "your body is still recovering from the strain of standing at dinner 3 nights ago. Are you certain you are prepared to lead an operation of this scale tonight?" I looked at him steadily, then at Elena, who watched me with an expression that carried both concern and unwavering support. "I have spent 6 months allowing my condition to define what I am capable of," I said. "Tonight that changes. Whatever my legs can or cannot do, my mind still runs this family, and I will not sit quietly while my own brother sells us to our enemies." Salvatore nodded slowly, respect clear in his expression. "Then we prepare immediately. I will gather the men we trust most, and we will move on the warehouse before Dante's meeting reaches its conclusion." He left to organize the operation, and for the next hour, the estate transformed around me. Vehicles were pulled from the garage and checked thoroughly. Men I had known for years, some who had served my father before serving me, gathered quietly in the main hall, their expressions grim but resolute. I wheeled myself among them, meeting each man's eyes, thanking them individually for their loyalty, aware that some of them might not return from whatever confrontation waited at the harbor. Margaret found me during the final preparations, her face pale with worry she made no effort to hide. "Victor, please," she said, gripping the arms of my chair. "Let Salvatore lead this. You do not need to be present at the warehouse itself. Direct things from here, where it is safe." "I cannot ask these men to risk their lives while I remain comfortable at home," I told her gently. "Whatever my legs can or cannot do, I will not send others into danger I am unwilling to face myself." She studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly, understanding the resolve behind my decision, even as it clearly frightened her. "Then come back safely," she said. "This family has already lost too much." "I intend to," I told her, echoing the promise I had already made to Elena. As the room filled with the quiet, efficient bustle of preparation, weapons checked, positions assigned, vehicles readied, Elena knelt beside my chair, one final time before the operation began. "Be careful," she said softly, her hand tightening around mine. "Whatever happens tonight, come back to me safely." "I intend to," I said, meaning it more fully than I had meant almost anything in the 6 long months since the crash that had first threatened to take everything from me. As the convoy prepared to depart into the darkening evening, I felt something settle inside me, a clarity I had not experienced since before the accident. Whatever Dante had become, whatever betrayal he had chosen to embrace, I would face him tonight, not as a broken man confined to a wheelchair, but as the leader my father had raised me to be, prepared to protect everything and everyone that mattered, regardless of the cost. Gunfire erupted the moment our vehicles rolled to a stop outside the harbor warehouse, shattering whatever advantage we had hoped to gain through surprise. Salvatore had positioned 2 teams around the perimeter, while I remained in the armored car, watching through the tinted windows as the operation unfolded exactly as planned, until it suddenly did not. A guard I did not recognize opened fire from the warehouse roof, and within seconds, the quiet harbor night became chaos. Muzzle flashes lighting the darkness, shouts echoing between shipping containers stacked high along the waterfront. "Stay in the vehicle," Salvatore ordered through the radio, his voice tight with controlled urgency. "We have this handled." I gripped the armrest of my seat, every instinct screaming at me to be out there directing the operation myself, fully aware that my body would only slow down the men trying to protect both me and the family's future. For the first time since deciding to lead this mission personally, I understood the wisdom in Margaret's earlier warning, though I refused to regret my decision to be present. Through the window, I watched my men move with practiced precision, clearing the perimeter, forcing the Hargrove guards into a defensive retreat toward the warehouse entrance. The gunfire slowed within minutes, then stopped entirely, replaced by tense shouting as Salvatore's team gained control of the exterior. "Perimeter secure," Salvatore reported through the radio. "We are moving inside now." I waited in agonizing silence, minutes stretching endlessly as I imagined every possible outcome unfolding within those warehouse walls. Finally, the radio crackled again. "Victor," Salvatore said, his voice carrying a strange mixture of relief and grim satisfaction. "You need to see this yourself." 2 of my men helped me from the vehicle into a wheelchair, better suited for the uneven ground, and I made my way toward the warehouse entrance, my heart pounding with anticipation and dread in equal measure. Inside, the scene that greeted me confirmed every fear I had carried since first learning of Dante's betrayal. Nathan Cross sat bound in a chair near an overturned table, his expression furious but controlled. 2 Hargrove representatives lay wounded, but alive near the entrance, disarmed and surrounded by my men, and Dante stood near the center of the room, his hands raised, his face pale with the realization that his plan had collapsed entirely. "Victor," he said, his voice unsteady, "this is not what it looks like." "Is it not?" I asked, wheeling myself closer, studying the scene carefully, the documents scattered across the overturned table clearly outlining shipping routes, territory maps, and financial arrangements that would have handed the Hargrove family everything my father had spent decades building. Because it looks very much like my brother selling this family's future to our oldest enemies. Dante said nothing, his earlier confidence completely drained from his expression. Nathan Cross, still bound to his chair, laughed bitterly. "Your brother came to us, Solani, practically begging for an alliance against you. Said you had gone soft, said the family was ripe for someone willing to take real control." "Shut up!" Dante snapped, though the anger in his voice carried more fear than authority. I studied my brother for a long moment, memories of our childhood mixing painfully with the reality standing before me now, a grown man willing to destroy everything our family had built, simply to satisfy jealousy that had festered for years, without proper acknowledgement or resolution. "Take Cross and his men into custody," I told Salvatore. "We will deal with the Hargrove family through proper channels, once this situation is fully resolved. For now, I need a moment alone with my brother." Salvatore hesitated, clearly uncomfortable leaving me alone with a man who had just attempted to orchestrate my downfall, but he nodded eventually, directing the remaining men to secure the prisoners and clear the warehouse of evidence that could not be allowed to surface publicly. Before Salvatore left, he leaned close to me and spoke quietly, so only I could hear. "Victor, whatever you decide here, remember that the men outside will follow your example. If you show weakness, they will begin to doubt your leadership. If you show excessive cruelty toward your own blood, some will question whether you have become the very thing this family has always tried to avoid becoming. Choose carefully." I nodded, understanding the weight of his counsel, and watched him leave to organize the remaining men, his footsteps echoing across the concrete floor until the warehouse door closed behind him. Once the room had emptied except for the 2 of us, Dante finally lowered his hands, staring at me with an expression I had not seen from him since we were boys, something between fear, and genuine regret. "Victor," he began, "I did not mean for it to go this far. I only wanted— You wanted my position," I interrupted quietly. "You have wanted it since the accident, perhaps even before that. Do not insult both of us by pretending otherwise now." He was silent, unable to argue against the truth of my words. "Do you understand what you have done?" I continued. "Not simply the betrayal against me, though that alone would be enough to end most men in our world permanently. You have threatened everything our father built, everything our family has protected for 2 generations, simply because you could not accept that circumstances forced me to lead differently than you believed I should." "I know," Dante said quietly. His earlier bravado completely collapsed. "I know, Victor. I was wrong." "Being wrong is not enough," I said. "Not for this." He looked up at me then, genuine fear finally replacing the arrogance he had carried for weeks. "What happens now?" I considered the question carefully, weighing everything my father had taught me about justice, about mercy, about the delicate balance required to lead a family like ours without becoming a tyrant or a fool. Killing my own brother, though many in our world would have expected exactly that response to such a serious betrayal, felt like a line I was not willing to cross, regardless of what he had done. "You will step down from every position within this family," I said finally. "Permanently. You will have no authority, no territory, no voice in decisions that shape our future. You will live, Dante, out of respect for our parents' memory and the childhood we once shared, before ambition poisoned everything between us. But you will live as nothing within this organization, watched carefully for the rest of your days, given no opportunity to repeat tonight's mistake." Dante absorbed the sentence slowly, understanding that I had chosen the most merciful path available to me, while still ensuring he could never threaten the family again. "Thank you," he said quietly, though the words carried little of his usual confidence. "Do not thank me," I said. "This is not kindness, Dante. This is the only outcome that allows both of us to survive tonight, without destroying what remains of whatever bond we once shared. Do not mistake it for forgiveness." He nodded slowly, accepting the terms without argument, and Salvatore returned shortly after to escort him from the warehouse, his future now reduced to quiet obscurity within the very organization he had once hoped to command entirely. The drive back to the estate passed in exhausted silence, my body aching from the tension of the operation, my mind processing everything that had unfolded within that warehouse. Salvatore rode beside me, occasionally glancing over with quiet concern. "You made the right decision," he said eventually. "Many men in your position would have chosen differently tonight." "Perhaps," I said, "or perhaps I simply could not bring myself to lose the last piece of family I have remaining, regardless of how badly he betrayed that connection." Salvatore said nothing further, respecting the weight of the decision I had made, and we continued the drive in silence until the estate gates finally came into view. Elena was waiting when we arrived, standing on the front steps despite the late hour, her arms wrapped around herself against the cool night air. The moment she saw me, relief flooded her expression, quickly followed by careful assessment, checking for any signs of injury before allowing herself to fully relax. "You are safe," she said, moving quickly to my side as Salvatore helped transfer me from the vehicle. "I am safe," I confirmed. "Dante has been dealt with. The threat from the Hargrove family has been contained, for now." She studied me carefully, noting the exhaustion clearly written across my features, the emotional weight of everything that had transpired that night. "Come inside," she said gently. "You need rest, and we need to talk." We made our way into the study, the same room where so much of our relationship had developed over the past weeks, and Elena helped me settle into my chair near the fireplace, the warmth slowly easing some of the tension from my exhausted body. "Tell me everything," she said, sitting across from me, her expression open and patient. I recounted the events of the evening carefully, the ambush at the warehouse, the confrontation with Dante, the decision I had made regarding his punishment. Elena listened without interruption, absorbing every detail with the same careful attention she brought to monitoring my physical recovery each day. "You showed him mercy," she said finally, once I had finished, "even after everything he did." "I do not know if it was mercy," I admitted. "Perhaps it was simply the only choice I could live with afterward." "That sounds like mercy to me," she said softly. We sat together in comfortable silence for a while, the fire crackling quietly in the hearth, the estate finally settling into peaceful stillness after the chaos of the evening. Eventually, Elena reached for my hand, her fingers intertwining with mine in a gesture that carried none of the clinical distance her role usually required. "Do you remember," she said quietly, "what we discussed before tonight's operation began, about having a proper conversation once the danger had passed?" "I remember," I said. "Then let me say clearly what I only hinted at before," she continued, her voice steady despite the vulnerability in her words. "These past weeks working with you, Victor, have changed something in me I did not expect to change. I came here to help a man walk again, and somewhere along the way, I found myself caring for that man far beyond anything my job required." "I feel the same," I said, matching her honesty with my own. "You did not simply help my body heal, Elena. You reminded me that I was still capable of being more than the wreckage that accident left behind. You reminded me what it felt like to be seen as a whole person, rather than a broken one." She smiled then, genuine warmth replacing the careful composure she usually maintained. "Then perhaps," she said softly, "we have both found something neither of us expected when this arrangement began." I reached for her other hand, holding both of them gently in mine, feeling something settle inside my chest that had been missing since long before the crash that changed everything about my life. "Stay," I said quietly, "not simply as my caregiver, Elena. Stay because I want you here, in whatever way you are willing to remain." "I intend to," she said, echoing words I had spoken to her days earlier, and something passed between us in that moment, a promise neither of us needed to speak aloud to fully understand. In the weeks that followed, my recovery continued steadily, the sensation slowly returning to muscles that had gone silent for months, small victories building toward a future that finally felt possible, rather than merely endured. Dante remained within the estate, stripped of all authority, living quietly under careful watch, the shadow of his betrayal following him through every interaction with the family he had once hoped to command. The Hargrove family, faced with clear evidence of their own attempted betrayal against an established truce, quietly withdrew their aggression, unwilling to risk open conflict once their plan had been exposed and neutralized so thoroughly. The territories, the shipping routes, the careful balance my father had spent decades establishing, all remained secure under my continued leadership. And every morning, Elena arrived for our sessions, no longer simply as hired care, but as someone who had chosen, deliberately and completely, to remain beside a man the world had once assumed was finished. Together, we worked through the slow, difficult process of rebuilding what the accident had taken, my legs growing stronger with each passing week, my heart healing in ways that had nothing to do with physical therapy at all. Margaret often joined us for tea in the evenings, her earlier worry finally replaced by quiet contentment as she watched the household settle into a calmer rhythm than it had known since before the crash. Salvatore, too, seemed lighter somehow, the constant vigilance of recent weeks easing into the familiar routines of managing family business, without the shadow of betrayal hanging over every decision. One afternoon, several weeks after the warehouse confrontation, Elena guided me through a new exercise, one that required standing with minimal support along a parallel bar installed in what had once been an unused sitting room. My legs trembled violently the first few attempts, muscles still relearning tasks they had once performed without thought, but by the fourth attempt, I managed nearly 10 full seconds of unsupported balance before needing to sit again. "That is remarkable progress," Elena said, unable to hide her excitement as she recorded the results in her notes. "6 months ago, your file showed almost no expectation of standing at all. Look at you now, Victor." "I had excellent motivation," I said, watching her carefully. She looked up, catching the meaning behind my words, and smiled the same warm smile that had slowly become one of my favorite things about each passing day. "I suppose you did," she said softly. We continued the exercises through the golden afternoon light spilling through the tall windows, and for the first time since the crash on that coastal road so many months earlier, I allowed myself to imagine a future extending well beyond mere survival, a future built on genuine partnership rather than simple endurance. I did not know, in those early days of recovery, whether I would ever walk unassisted again. The doctors remained cautiously optimistic, careful never to promise more than the evidence supported. But sitting in my study each evening, watching the sunset paint the estate grounds in warm golden light, Elena's hand resting comfortably in mine, I understood something far more important than the eventual verdict on my legs. I had faced betrayal from my own blood and survived it with my family's foundation intact. I had faced humiliation and violence and had chosen, ultimately, the path of mercy rather than vengeance. And I had found, in the unlikeliest of circumstances, a woman who saw past the wheelchair, past the empire, past the reputation that preceded me into every room, straight to the man capable of standing taller than he ever had before, regardless of whether his legs cooperated with that truth. Whatever challenges remained ahead, I no longer faced them as a broken man clinging to power out of habit. I faced them as Victor Solani, leader of my family by choice rather than mere inheritance, standing firmly in my own convictions, even when my legs could not yet stand firmly beneath me, with Elena beside me, choosing every single day to stay.